Have you ever felt your life pivot in a single moment? Today, I'm going to tell you the incredible story of a young woman whose world changed forever one night. It's a tale of chance encounters, dangerous secrets, and a love that defied the odds. This is the story of how one quiet, principled woman crossed paths with a powerful, guarded mafia boss in a city glowing with Italian charm, and how that fateful meeting, in the hush of a high-end restaurant after hours, set off a chain of events that neither of them could have imagined. Aria Santini pushed open the heavy glass door of La Rosa Nera, one of Milan's most exclusive restaurants, and stepped inside. Her heels clicked softly on the polished marble floor as she paused, taking in the ambiance. The interior was bathed in a soft golden glow from ornate chandeliers. Crisp white tablecloths and flickering candles decorated each table, casting gentle shadows on the terracotta-hued walls. A quiet melody of classical Italian music drifted through the air, mingling with the clink of fine china and muted conversations from the few patrons scattered about. Aria brushed a strand of her dark chestnut hair behind her ear and held her head high, though her heart fluttered with nerves. She didn't often visit places like this alone. In truth, she wasn't even sure why she had come tonight. Perhaps it was the whisper of a tip from a friend that La Rosa Nera was a place where stories hid in the shadows. Perhaps it was simply the need to treat herself to a nice dinner after the week she'd had. Either way, here she was, a solitary young woman in a restaurant known for hosting the city's elite. A polite waiter approached, dressed smartly in a black vest and bow tie. "Buonasera, signorina," he greeted with a courteous smile. "Table for one?" "Yes, please," Aria replied softly, offering a polite smile of her own. The waiter led her to a small table in a cozy corner that offered a view of the room. She sat down, setting her purse on her lap, and smoothed the skirt of her modest yet elegant navy blue dress. As the waiter handed her a leather-bound menu and poured sparkling water into a crystal glass, Aria exhaled slowly to steady herself. The restaurant was nearly empty, yet Aria could not shake the feeling she was being watched. She cast a discreet glance around. That's when she noticed him. Across the dining room, at a larger table near the back, sat a man flanked by two other gentlemen. He was impossibly handsome in a chiseled, forbidding sort of way, tall and well-built, with broad shoulders beneath a tailored charcoal gray suit. His hair was jet black, neatly swept back, and even in the dim light, Aria could discern the sharp lines of his clean-shaven jaw and the intensity of his gaze. He exuded an aura of quiet authority. The two men with him, likely bodyguards or associates, sat at a respectful distance, as if they were there to serve and not dine. The man's eyes were fixed in her direction. Caught staring, Aria quickly looked down at her menu, her heart picking up speed. Was he watching me? She wondered. A flush warmed her cheeks. Perhaps he was simply gazing off in thought. It could be nothing. Still, she sensed a tension in the air now. She stole another quick glance from beneath her lashes. The man was speaking in hushed tones to one of his companions, who gave a subtle nod and rose from the table. That suited companion slipped away, disappearing through a side door that likely led to the kitchen or a back office. Aria swallowed and tried to focus on the menu. It was filled with gourmet Italian dishes, handmade pappardelle and truffle cream, osso buco with saffron risotto, wild mushroom ravioli. Her appetite was meager due to nerves, but she forced herself to choose something. When the waiter returned, she ordered a small plate of gnocchi al pomodoro and a glass of red Barolo wine. He smiled and took her menu, leaving her once more alone with her thoughts. As she waited, Aria couldn't help scanning the room again. The dark-eyed man still sat at his table, now alone except for one remaining bodyguard who stood a few paces behind him. The other patrons seemed to give that table a wide berth, knowingly avoiding the man's space. There was something undoubtedly powerful about him. He might have been around 35 or 40, Aria guessed, clearly a man used to command. He toyed absently with the stem of his wine glass, swirling a deep crimson liquid as he stared off, either lost in thought or observation. Aria's gaze darted away when his eyes suddenly lifted and met hers across the room. Her breath caught. Even from a distance, his eyes were striking, a piercing shade of pewter gray, cold and penetrating. In that fleeting moment of eye contact, Aria felt laid bare, as if he could see right through her poised exterior to the tremor of uncertainty beneath. Hastily she looked away, heat blooming in her face, Get a grip, she chided herself. You're here to enjoy a quiet meal. Nothing more. Yet the questions nagged at her. Who is he? She mused. And why does he have bodyguards in a restaurant? It wasn't entirely uncommon in Milan for wealthy figures to have security, but something about the scenario made her uneasy. She had heard whispers that La Rosa Nera was owned by a mysterious entrepreneur with rumored connections to organized crime. A mafia boss, some said in hushed tones. But those were just rumors, surely, the kind that swirl around any powerful, secretive figure. Arya had never put much stock in gossip. Her thoughts were interrupted when her wine arrived. She took a small sip. It was excellent, velvety and rich. Slowly, she began to relax, convincing herself that all was well. She even managed to enjoy the first few bites of her gnocchi when it came, the tangy tomato sauce and fresh basil awakening her taste buds. But just as Arya began to feel at ease, a sudden commotion at the entrance caught her attention. The front door swung open, and a burly man in a leather jacket stumbled in, clearly intoxicated. He scanned the room with bleary eyes until his gaze landed on the solitary figure of Arya. With a sloppy grin, the drunken man lurched towards her table. "Hey there, Bella," he slurred, leering down at Arya. She recoiled slightly at the stench of alcohol wafting from him. "Why all alone, eh? How about I keep you company?" Arya's heart thudded in alarm. "No, thank you," she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady and polite. "I'm fine on my own." The drunk chuckled, unfazed. Don't be like that. A pretty girl shouldn't drink alone." He reached out a hand as if to touch her shoulder. Arya tensed, instinctively pushing her chair back. "Please, I asked you to leave me be," she said, more sharply this time. Her pulse quickened in fear. She cast a quick, desperate glance toward the staff. Surely someone would intervene. Before she could react further, a new voice cut through the air like a blade, low, cold, and commanding. She said she's not interested. Arya and the drunken man both turned. The dark-haired man in the suit was now standing just a few steps away, fixing the intruder with an icy glare. How had he moved so silently from across the room? The drunk blinked in confusion, then scowled. "And who the hell are you?" The intruder bristled, puffing out his chest. The drunk's bravado wavered slightly under the steady intensity of the suited man's gray eyes. The elegant man remained calm and unruffled, but there was an unmistakable menace simmering beneath his composed exterior. "I'm the owner of this establishment," he said quietly, each word measured. "You are disturbing my guest. I will ask you once to leave." Something in his tone, deadly soft, made even the drunken lout hesitate. The entire restaurant had fallen silent. All eyes were on the confrontation. The drunk glanced uncertainly between Arya and the tall man who now stood between them. For a moment it seemed he might push his luck. But then, the man's bodyguard appeared just behind him, one hand resting with casual promise on a bulge beneath his jacket, a hint of the firearm concealed there. The drunk's face paled. He raised his hands defensively. "All right, man, no trouble. I'm going," he mumbled. With one last bleary look at Arya, he backed off and stumbled out of the restaurant as clumsily as he'd entered. The door swung shut behind him, cutting off the faint sound of his muttering. Arya released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Around the room, murmurs of normalcy slowly resumed as the delicate atmosphere attempted to right itself. The bodyguard melted back into the shadows. The incident was over almost as quickly as it began. The tall man turned to face Arya. For a heartbeat, she met his gaze directly. Her hazel eyes, wide from the adrenaline rush, looked up at her mysterious savior. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice a little unsteady. "You didn't have to do that." He inclined his head a fraction. Up close, he was even more striking. Late 30s, olive-toned skin, an elegant Roman nose and high cheekbones. His gray eyes regarded her intensely, flickering over her face as if to assess whether she was truly all right. "No thanks necessary," he replied in a low voice. "I protect everyone under my roof." His words were courteous, but something in his stare made Arya's stomach flip. There was concern there, but also curiosity, as though he, too, felt the strange gravity that seemed to tug between them in that moment. Realizing she was half standing from pushing her chair back, Arya flushed and sank into her seat again. He continued to study her for a moment, then spoke once more, his tone gentler now. "You are alone here?" It was more observation than question. Arya nodded, finding her voice. Yes, I was just having dinner." A small frown touched his lips. Not of displeasure exactly, perhaps perplexity. "Forgive me if this is forward, Signorina, but a fine restaurant can be a lonely place for a woman by herself." He paused, then added almost in spite of himself, "The fault is mine. I should ensure my guests feel comfortable and safe. May I join you for a minute?" Arya's heart lurched in surprise at the offer. She glanced around, noting that the remaining patrons had gone back to their own business, though a few still snuck curious glances toward her table. Was the owner of La Rosanera really asking to sit with her? Up close, he certainly fit the image of the rumored Mafia boss, confident, sharp, and used to being obeyed. Yet he had been courteous, even protective. He was waiting for an answer. Arya quickly nodded. "Of course. I mean, yes, please." She hoped she didn't sound as flustered as she felt. He gave a faint, approving smile and sat down in the seat across from her. "Thank you." For a moment he said nothing further, as if considering her anew. Arya fidgeted with her napkin under the table, unsure what to do under the weight of his gaze. At last he spoke. "My name is Lorenzo Vitale." His voice was smoother now, cultured and calm. He extended a hand across the table in greeting. Arya reached out to shake his hand. His grip was warm, firm but not aggressive. "Arya Santini," she offered in return. Her smaller hand nearly disappeared inside his strong grasp. As they released, an inexplicable tingle ran up her arm. She withdrew her hand, folding it with the other in her lap to hide a slight tremor. "Arya," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. His accent in Italian was elegant. Even when he spoke English, there was a lilting undertone. "A lovely name. It means air or melody, does it not?" She nodded, a little surprised he knew that. "Yes, it does." Lorenzo's steely eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "It suits you." Before she could respond, he continued, "I must apologize again for what happened. I regret that a guest in my restaurant experienced such harassment. I assure you, that man will not be allowed back." Arya shook her head lightly. "It's all right. It wasn't your fault. And you really didn't have to step in yourself. But I'm very grateful you did." She hesitated, then added sincerely, "You handled it well." She had nearly said deftly, but stopped herself, realizing such a word might hint that she noticed how easily he dealt with trouble, something a mere restaurant owner might not be so adept at. A ghost of a wry smile touched Lorenzo's lips, as if he guessed her unspoken thought. "I'm glad you approve," he said, a hint of dry humor in his tone. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he asked, "If I may, what brings you to La Rosanera tonight? As you said, you were just having dinner, but a young woman dining alone at this hour. It piques one's curiosity. Do you often visit us?" There was no accusation in his voice, only genuine interest layered under polite conversation. Still, Arya felt a pang of nerves. She had come partly out of curiosity herself, to see what she might glean about this place she'd heard murmurs about. But she couldn't very well say that. She began, willing herself to sound composed. "Honestly, I don't go out to fancy restaurants often. I was supposed to meet a friend here tonight, but she canceled at the last minute." The lie came easily enough, a half-truth at least. Arya did have a friend who talked about coming here, but that friend certainly wasn't in attendance. I decided I might as well not waste the reservation, and I was curious to try the food everyone raves about. Lorenzo studied her quietly as she spoke, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said after a moment. "I'm sorry your friend did not join you. I hope our staff have been accommodating despite the change in plan." "Oh yes. Everything has been wonderful," Arya assured quickly. She lifted her glass of Barolo slightly. "This wine is excellent, and the gnocchi—" She offered a shy smile. "It lives up to the hype." Lorenzo's posture relaxed marginally. He nodded in approval. "I'm glad to hear that. We strive to ensure our reputation is earned. Your meal is getting cold. Please, don't let me keep you from enjoying it." His sudden consideration for such a simple thing made Arya smile. "Actually, I think I've lost a bit of my appetite," she admitted. "It's late and the excitement didn't help." He inclined his head. Understandable. Then perhaps a change of scenery would do you good. Before she could puzzle over what he meant, Lorenzo rose smoothly from his chair. Offering her his hand, he said in a tone that was polite, yet left little room for refusal. "Come with me." Arya looked up at him, heart thumping. The words he spoke were simple but delivered with quiet command. The direct invitation, or was it an order? Sent a thrill of both apprehension and excitement through her. She placed her hand tentatively in his, allowing him to help her up from her seat. His touch was confident and steady, his large hand gently enveloping hers with reassurance. "All right," she agreed softly, uncertain but compelled to trust him in that moment. Lorenzo nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his dark gaze. Without letting go of her hand, he led her away from the table. Arya barely had time to grab her purse with her free hand as he guided her across the dining room. The few remaining diners watched their passing with open curiosity now. What was the reclusive owner doing with this unknown woman? Her mind raced. Where was he taking her? What did he intend? She had heard rumors about men like him, their capacity for ruthlessness. Yet he had shown her only kindness and courtesy so far. And beneath his hardened exterior, she sensed a deep well of control, and perhaps even loneliness. They walked past the main floor toward a polished mahogany door at the side, the same door Arya had seen his associate disappear into earlier. Lorenzo gave a small nod to a staff member standing nearby, and the man quickly opened the door for them. Beyond it lay a private room, part wine cellar, part lounge. The walls were lined with shelves of vintage bottles, and there were plush leather chairs around a low table. The ambiance was quieter here, insulated from the clatter of the dining hall. A single ornate lamp cast a warm glow over a rich Persian rug on the floor. Arya realized this must be a VIP lounge or a private tasting room for special guests. Lorenzo finally released her hand, gesturing for her to enter ahead of him. She stepped inside, her senses immediately enveloped by the scent of aged oak from the wine casks and a faint trace of his cologne. Crisp, with a dark spice. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing them in a cocoon of stillness. Arya's pulse quickened. She was alone with him now, away from prying eyes. The situation wasn't entirely proper. A lady alone with a man she'd just met, and a man of dangerous repute at that. Yet she felt oddly safe. Lorenzo motioned toward the chairs. "Please make yourself comfortable," he said quietly. "I thought you might prefer a quieter place after what happened." She nodded and sat down on one of the leather chairs, the material cool beneath her thighs through her dress. Lorenzo took the chair adjacent, angled toward her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Arya clasped her hands in her lap to hide their slight shaking, and mustered the courage to break the silence. "This is a beautiful room," she remarked softly, looking around at the impressive collection of wines and the tasteful decor. "You have excellent taste, Mr. Vitale." "Call me Lorenzo," he interjected gently. "Please, Mr. Vitale was my father." A shadow flickered in his eyes at the mention of his father, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Arya inclined her head. "Lorenzo," she corrected herself. The name felt oddly intimate on her tongue, and she hoped the dim lighting hid the renewed flush on her cheeks. He gave a faint smile of acknowledgement. "Thank you. I'm pleased you like it. This is one of my favorite rooms in the restaurant, a space to think and unwind." Lorenzo leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his thighs, hands loosely clasped. The posture made him seem a little less formal, more approachable. Arya felt his gaze steady on her again. In the hush of the private lounge, with the golden lamplight softening the hard planes of his face, he looked almost weary. The hint of vulnerability caught her off guard. "You must think it strange," Lorenzo said quietly, "for me to bring you here like this." A self-deprecating note colored his voice. "Forgive me if I've made you uncomfortable. I realize I haven't even properly asked if you're all right after that incident." He genuinely was concerned for her feelings, it seemed. Arya shook her head. "I'm fine, really. Just a little shaken earlier, but I appreciate you asking." And she offered him a small, sincere smile. "It's not strange. It's thoughtful. You've been very kind to me. A complete stranger. I confess I didn't expect that." Lorenzo's lips curved. Not quite a smile, but something softer than before. Perhaps I simply value my customers, he said lightly, then added in a more reflective tone. Or perhaps I recognize another soul who, like me, knows what it's like to be alone in a crowd. Arya's eyes widened slightly at that insight. Alone in a crowd. Yes, she often felt that way, especially in recent times. How could he have sensed it? Before she could form a reply, a discreet knock came at the door. Lorenzo straightened, his face shifting back to a mask of composure. "Entra," he called. The door opened, revealing the waiter from before, carrying a tray with Arya's gnocchi dish, now freshly replated, and her glass of wine refilled. The waiter glanced curiously at the two of them, but said nothing out of turn. "Signore per la signorina," the waiter murmured, placing the dish and wine on the low table in front of Arya. He also set down a small plate of assorted Italian cookies and chocolates, complimentary desserts. Lorenzo nodded. "Grazie, Marco." With a knowing glint, he added, "That will be all. Close the door behind you, per favor." Marco bowed out with a polite, "Buona serata," and gently shut the door once more, leaving them in privacy. "I had them keep your dinner warm," Lorenzo explained, eyes returning to Arya. "You shouldn't miss out on the gnocchi." Arya was genuinely touched by the gesture. "That's very considerate. Thank you." She picked up her fork and took a bite of the pillowy gnocchi. It melted in her mouth, rich and comforting. She hadn't realized how hungry she still was until that moment. This is amazing," she admitted after swallowing, smiling wider this time. "I see why La Rosanera has its reputation." Lorenzo regarded her with quiet satisfaction. "I'm glad. We aim for the best." He watched her take another bite, then seemed to remember something. I should have asked. Do you mind if I continue to join you? Or would you prefer to dine alone now? I don't wish to impose." For a second, Arya imagined any other high-powered man in his position assuming his presence was a gift. But Lorenzo, despite his commanding aura, was giving her the choice. The truth was she didn't want him to leave. She felt at ease with him, beneath the curiosity and initial fear, and undeniably intrigued. "Please stay," she said softly. "It's nice to have company." He inclined his head, that lock of dark hair falling forward slightly before he smoothed it back. "Then I will." He poured himself a measure of amber scotch from a crystal decanter on a side table. Arya noted his hands, strong, elegant fingers, but with a few small scars on the knuckles. Marks of violence, or just life's roughness? She realized she was staring at his hands and quickly averted her eyes to her plate. As she ate a few more bites, Lorenzo asked in a conversational tone, "So, Miss Arya Santini, tell me a bit about yourself. If you're comfortable, that is. You already know more about me than most. Being the owner of a notable restaurant comes with a certain local infamy." There was a trace of irony in his voice. "Yet I have the advantage of you. You know my name, but I know so little of you." Arya dabbed her lips with the napkin, gathering her thoughts. How much should she say? She decided to stick close to the truth, aside from the parts she had to guard for now. "Well," she began, "I'm 26 years old. I was born and raised here in Italy, though I studied in London for a couple of years. I moved to Milan after university and started working in journalism for a while." She paused, the memory of her last investigative piece and its fallout flashing through her mind. She quickly moved on. "But I left that job not too long ago and I've been looking for a new direction, I suppose." Lorenzo's brows lifted slightly at the mention of journalism. "A reporter." "That explains the courage," he remarked, a half-smile appearing. "May I ask why you left?" Arya shifted, not wanting to reveal too much. "Let's just say I was writing a story that didn't sit well with some powerful individuals. My editor was pressured to drop it. I refused to back down and things got difficult. I decided it was best to move on." She kept her tone light, but a bitterness crept in despite herself. That investigative piece had been her passion project for months, and seeing it killed had hurt deeply. So had the implied threats to her safety if she continued. Lorenzo studied her intently. "So you stood by your principles, even at great personal cost." It wasn't a question. It was stated with something like respect. That is admirable. And dangerous. In our world, truth can be a weapon as much as a gun. His words, especially our world, hung in the air. Arya felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. He knew about facing powerful forces too, though perhaps from the other side of the law. She wondered if he guessed what kind of story she'd been working on. Her research had indeed led her toward organized crime threads in the city. Could he suspect that? But Lorenzo didn't press further on that topic. Instead, he asked, "And now? What new direction are you seeking?" Arya sighed softly. "I'm not entirely sure yet. I've been considering freelance writing, or maybe something entirely different. It's been a confusing time for me." She offered a faint, self-conscious chuckle. Finding oneself and all that. To her surprise, Lorenzo's expression gentled. "I know that feeling well, actually," he murmured. "There was a time I also questioned my path, but circumstances had a way of making the choice for me." His gaze grew distant, as if recalling a memory both sweet and sour. Then he lifted his glass of scotch slightly in a toast-like gesture. "To finding one's true path wherever it may lead." Arya picked up her wine and clinked it softly against his glass. "To finding one's path," she echoed with a smile. They drank. For a moment, silence draped over them, but it was comfortable now. The kind of quiet shared by people who, despite being strangers just hours ago, felt a mutual understanding. Arya found herself relaxing more deeply into the leather chair. After a while, Lorenzo set his empty glass down and glanced at his watch, a sleek silver timepiece that probably cost more than Arya's monthly rent. "It's quite late," he noted, sounding almost regretful. Indeed, Arya realized she had lost track of time in this windowless lounge. It could be near midnight now. She straightened. "Oh, I didn't realize. I should probably head home." As much as she was enjoying this surreal evening, a flicker of practicality tugged at her. It probably wasn't wise to linger too long with a man like him, was it? Yet she was reluctant to leave his company. Lorenzo rose to his feet, and Arya did likewise. He towered over her by a head, and for the first time she felt just how close they were in the small room. He gave her a polite nod. "Allow me to have my driver take you home. The hour is late, and I would feel better knowing you got back safely." "Oh, that's not necessary," Arya began to protest. She usually took care of herself, but the stern set of his jaw told her this was non-negotiable. It was both endearing and a bit frustrating how protective he had become so quickly. "I insist," Lorenzo said firmly, though not unkindly. "Indulge me in this, Arya." The sound of her first name, spoken in that deep voice, did something funny to her stomach. She relented with a small nod. "All right, thank you." He opened the door, and as they stepped out, he placed a light hand at the small of her back to guide her through the corridor. The gesture was gentlemanly, yet Arya felt the warmth of his touch through the fabric of her dress, sending a little thrill through her. Lorenzo spoke softly to one of his staff in Italian, instructing them to bring his car around. The main dining area was now nearly empty. The staff were quietly beginning to close up for the night. The only others remaining were a couple at the far end lingering over dessert, oblivious to anything but each other. Arya retrieved her coat from the attentive host. She noticed how the employees treated Lorenzo with a deference that went beyond normal respect for a restaurant owner. They bowed their heads slightly when he passed, eyes lowered until he was gone by. Lorenzo seemed used to it, neither acknowledging nor dismissing the gestures. As they reached the front entrance, the cool night air of Milan wafted in. The city streets outside were quieter now, with just the occasional car humming past and the street lamps casting pools of golden light on the sidewalks. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. A driver in a crisp suit hopped out and opened the back door. Lorenzo turned to Arya, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Arya," he said, his voice lower than before, almost intimate. Arya clutched her purse strap nervously. "Likewise. Thank you for everything, Lorenzo. For stepping in, for the hospitality, and the company." She gave him a genuine smile. Tonight turned out very differently than I expected. For the first time, she thought she saw the hint of a real smile on his face. Small, but it reached his eyes with a warmth that took her breath away. "I hope it was a pleasant surprise then." "It was," she affirmed softly. He seemed to hesitate a moment, as if considering something. Then he gently reached for her hand once more. Arya let him take it. He bowed his head slightly as he brushed the barest whisper of a kiss across the back of her knuckles. The old-fashioned gesture was unexpectedly gallant, sending her pulse racing. Buonanotte, Aria, Lorenzo said, releasing her hand reluctantly. Until we meet again. Her cheeks warmed and she hoped the night concealed it. Good night, Lorenzo. With that, Aria slipped into the backseat of the sedan. The driver closed the door behind her. Through the window, she watched Lorenzo step back and give a final nod to her and then to the driver. As the car pulled away from the curb, her eyes remained on the figure of the mysterious Mafia boss, for she felt certain now that's what he was, standing under the soft glow of La Rosa Nera's marquee. He watched until the car merged into the boulevard's sparse traffic. Aria finally sank back against the leather seat, exhaling a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her life had felt stuck in a rut for weeks, ever since she'd left her job. But in the span of a few hours, an ordinary Tuesday night had spiraled into something extraordinary. She had met Lorenzo Vitale, a man whispered to be as dangerous as he was powerful, and yet she had seen a side of him that felt disarmingly genuine and kind. Her rational mind warned that getting involved with a man like him could only spell trouble. But another part of her, the part drawn to mysteries and truth, was intensely curious about him. She sensed there were layers to Lorenzo, secrets and burdens he carried behind those storm-gray eyes. As the car glided through the moonlit streets toward her apartment, Aria found herself touching the back of her hand where his lips had grazed it, the ghost of his warmth still tingling on her skin. She bit her lip, trying and failing to suppress the smile that welled up from deep within her. However unexpected and strange, this night had awakened something in her. A spark of intrigue, a flutter of attraction, and perhaps the faint stirrings of destiny. Little did Aria know, this was only the beginning. That single fateful encounter, a Mafia boss saying, "Come with me," to a principled young woman alone in his restaurant, would soon turn both their lives upside down in ways neither of them could foresee. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of Aria's small apartment the next morning, waking her from a fitful sleep. She stretched in bed, a soft sigh escaping her lips as memories of the previous night flooded back. It almost felt like a dream. The elegant restaurant, the confrontation, and Lorenzo Vitale, larger than life, stepping in to rescue her. And then the hours spent talking in that private lounge, the intensity in his gray eyes, the gentleness of his goodnight gesture. Aria rolled onto her side, staring at the golden stripes of morning light on her wall. Did that really happen? She reached over to her bedside table and picked up the small business card she'd placed there when she got home. Embossed with gold script, it read, Lorenzo Vitale, proprietor, La Rosa Nera, with a phone number. He had handed it to her just before she stepped into the car, telling her she could contact him if she ever needed anything. Aria had accepted it with a promise to text once she arrived home safely, which she did, sending a brief message thanking him again for the evening. He had responded almost immediately. I'm glad. Sleep well, Aria. She found herself smiling at the memory of that simple reply. Now in the bright reality of day, Aria felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. She hardly knew Lorenzo, yet there had been an undeniable spark between them. But he was a Mafia boss, or at least deeply entwined in a dangerous world. What could come of this? Nothing good, her rational side warned. And yet, another part of her, the part that had agreed to take his hand, whispered that perhaps meeting him had a purpose. Perhaps she was meant to uncover something. About him. About the secrets of Milan's underworld she had been chasing as a journalist. Or perhaps simply, she was meant to change each other's lives. She had just risen from bed and was making coffee when a sudden ring from her intercom startled her. Aria set down the mug and went to the buzzer. Yes? Delivery for Miss Santini, a crisp voice crackled through. Delivery? She wasn't expecting any. Puzzled, Aria pressed the button to open the downstairs door. Moments later, she opened her apartment door to find a young man in a courier uniform, holding a long white box tied with a silk ribbon. Sign here, please, he said, offering a clipboard. Aria signed, and he handed her the box with a polite nod before departing. Aria carried the mysterious package to her kitchen table, her heart picking up speed. With care, she tugged loose the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside was a dozen long-stemmed red roses, their petals lush and fragrant. She gasped softly. Nestled among them was a small envelope with her name inscribed in bold, elegant handwriting. Hands slightly shaky, Arya opened the envelope and pulled out a single note card. On it was written, "Dear Arya, thank you for gracing my establishment with your presence last night. I find myself hoping our conversation was not the last. Would you do me the honor of meeting me for lunch today? I have a proposition that might interest you. If you agree, my driver will pick you up at noon. Yours, Lorenzo Vitale." Arya read the note twice, her heart fluttering wildly. Lunch. Today. A proposition? The wording was formal, almost old-fashioned in its courtesy, and yet the gesture of sending roses was distinctly romantic. She brought one of the velvety blooms to her nose, inhaling its sweet scent as she tried to think. What kind of proposition could Lorenzo have for her? A cynical part of her wondered if he intended to buy her silence or cooperation, assuming she had guesses about his affairs from last night. Or perhaps he simply wanted to see her again and was using business as a pretext. The thought sent an involuntary thrill through her. She considered her options. She could decline, send a polite message that she was busy, or simply ignore it. That would be the safe, sensible path. After all, getting further entangled with a man like him held obvious risks. But Arya's gaze drifted to the roses again, and to the card and its words. I find myself hoping our conversation was not the last. The truth was, she hoped the same. Her life of late had been lonely, comprised mostly of solitary job hunting and half-hearted attempts to pursue freelance projects. The prospect of an exciting lunch meeting, and the mystery of his proposition, was too tempting to refuse. She glanced at the clock. It was already 9:30 a.m. If she was to be ready by noon, she had to hurry. Decision made, Arya jumped into action, nerves humming with anticipation. By 11:55, Arya stood outside her apartment building dressed in a smart, chic ensemble, tailored charcoal slacks and a cream blouse with lace trim, a look professional yet feminine. She clutched a file folder containing her resume and a few writing samples. If this was a job proposition as she suspected, she wanted to be prepared. Her mind raced with questions. Why would he want to hire me? Is it truly a legitimate offer or something more illicit? She resolved to hear him out but remain cautious. Right on schedule, the familiar black sedan pulled up. The same driver from last night stepped out and opened the rear door for her. "Good day, Miss Santini," he greeted politely. "Hello," she replied, climbing in. The ride was smooth as the car navigated through midday traffic. To her surprise, they didn't head towards La Rosanera. Instead, after a short drive, the car turned into the entrance of a luxurious high-rise building in the city center. The driver stopped under a portico and escorted Arya inside, where a receptionist greeted her and guided her to a private elevator. As the elevator ascended, Arya's stomach fluttered. She checked her reflection in the polished steel walls, smoothing a stray strand of hair and pressing her lips together to freshen the subtle berry-colored lipstick she wore. Calm down, she told herself. It's just lunch, with a powerful, intimidating, dangerously attractive man who happens to run the city's underworld. No big deal. She almost laughed at her own internal sarcasm. The doors opened directly into an opulent penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Milan's skyline, sunlight flooding the modern space. There was an open living area with designer furniture and a terrace beyond where a table was set under a pergola draped in bougainvillea vines. Lorenzo stood by the terrace railing, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the city. He turned as he heard her arrival. If Arya had thought him handsome in the dim restaurant, he was absolutely striking in daylight. He wore a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and charcoal trousers much like her own. Without a jacket, she could see a shoulder holster strapped under his left arm, a black pistol snug in it. He made no attempt to hide it. It was simply part of him, a quiet reminder of the life he led. The contrast of that weapon with the domestic beauty of potted lemon trees and flowers on the terrace was not lost on her. "Arya," Lorenzo greeted her warmly, stepping forward. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, and in his eyes she caught a glimmer of pleasure at seeing her. "I'm so glad you came." She mustered a confident smile, hoping it hid her racing heart. "Your invitation was persuasive," she replied lightly, lifting the note he'd sent. "And thank you for the roses, they're beautiful." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "I'm glad you liked them. Please, come join me outside. It's a lovely day to dine al fresco." He offered his arm to her. After the tiniest hesitation, Arya slipped her hand around his forearm, letting him lead her onto the terrace. The air was warm and perfumed by the bougainvillea blossoms and the aromas of grilled vegetables and herbs from the table. A catered lunch had been set out. A platter of bruschetta, a fresh caprese salad with ripe tomatoes and basil, and a bottle of chilled prosecco in an ice bucket. A uniformed server, evidently brought in for this occasion, stood by discreetly and pulled out a chair for Arya. As they sat, Lorenzo poured 2 flutes of the sparkling wine and raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he toasted, his gray eyes never leaving her. Arya clinked her glass gently to his. "To new beginnings," she echoed before taking a sip. The prosecco was crisp and effervescent on her tongue. They began with small talk as they sampled the food, the weather, a passing reference to a football team. Lorenzo seemed to be easing her in before getting to the heart of the matter. After a few minutes, he nodded to the server, who quietly bowed and retreated indoors, leaving them alone on the terrace. Lorenzo turned back to Arya, his expression earnest. "You must be wondering why I asked you here." She met his gaze. "The thought did cross my mind," she admitted, taking a small bite of bruschetta to quell her nerves. "Your note mentioned a proposition." He inclined his head. "Yes, I'll get straight to the point. After our conversation last night, I did a bit of research on you." Seeing her stiffen slightly, he lifted a hand reassuringly. "Nothing invasive, just public information. I discovered you were indeed a journalist until recently." Arya's heart skipped. The idea of him looking into her background was both flattering and alarming. She said nothing, letting him continue. "I also learned you left your newspaper under contentious circumstances." His voice remained gentle, but Arya felt the weight of his understanding. "I have a guess as to why. You were likely writing about something important that someone powerful didn't want public. That speaks to your integrity." Arya looked down, absently tracing the rim of her glass with a fingertip. "You're not wrong," she said quietly. "I was working on an investigative piece. When pressure was applied to bury it, I refused. Ultimately, I lost my job." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features, not directed at her, but on her behalf. "It infuriates me when honest people are silenced by the corrupt," he said. And Arya noted the irony of such a statement from him. Perhaps he sensed it too, for he then sighed. "I know I may not seem like someone who upholds law and order, but I do have my own code of ethics." "I believe you," Arya said softly, and realized she meant it. In his world, he likely had a set of rules he lived by, even if they weren't the law's rules. Lorenzo reached across the table, almost hesitantly, and brushed his fingers lightly over the back of her hand. It was a brief, comforting touch. "Last night you impressed me, Arya. You showed courage and composure, and I felt a connection in how you stood by your principles. People like you, they're rare in my circles." Her breath caught as he withdrew his hand, leaving a tingling warmth. "Thank you," she murmured, meeting his eyes. "I'm not sure what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet. Just hear me out," he said. He straightened in his chair slightly, adopting a more formal tone. "I have a proposition for you. I recently lost someone on my staff, my public relations manager. He handled communications for my legitimate enterprises, including La Rosanera and a few other businesses I own. It's a role that requires intelligence, discretion, and strong writing skills. I think you'd be excellent at it." Arya blinked, surprised. Of all things, she hadn't expected a straightforward job offer. "You want me to work for you?" "Yes, the position is yours if you want it," he said plainly. "I'll be honest. It would mean being privy to some sensitive information and occasionally handling matters that require delicacy. But nothing illegal," he added quickly at her wary look. A faint smile touched his lips. "As I said, this is for my legitimate businesses. In return, I can offer a generous salary and full benefits." Arya felt as though she had stepped into some alternate reality where opportunities like this just landed in her lap. It almost sounded too good to be true. A stable job using her skills, with high pay and fascinating work. Yet working so closely with Lorenzo, could she do that without compromising her principles? Would she become complicit in covering up wrongdoing, even if indirectly? And was she walking into a trap? "What would you expect of me exactly?" she asked carefully. "In terms of discretion, would I be allowed to be fully honest in what I communicate? Or would I be spinning things? Lorenzo's lips quirked. A fair question. The truth is, part of PR is managing narratives favorably, but I'm not asking you to lie outright, just to present my businesses in the best possible light. For instance, if a journalist asks about the ownership of La Rosa Nera, you emphasize its award-winning cuisine and community involvement, not the wild rumors that it's a mafia den. There was a glint in his eye at that. Arya gave a small laugh despite herself. Right. I think I could handle that. He leaned forward, tone earnest. Beyond that, Arya, I hope you could be someone I trust. My world, it can be isolating. Few speak their minds to me honestly. Your candor would be a welcome change. She heard the unspoken truth. He was lonely at the top, surrounded by yes-men and fear. Her heart softened a little more. Still, she hesitated. Lorenzo, it's a very generous offer, but I have to ask. Why me? We just met. You could hire any experienced PR professional in the city. Why take a chance on a journalist with no formal PR background? He considered her, the breeze ruffling a lock of his dark hair. Because I feel I can trust you. My instincts are rarely wrong. The quiet conviction in his voice made Arya's decision easier. Against all better judgment, she wanted to trust him too. Perhaps it was the way he had shown her respect and kindness, or the sincerity she sensed beneath his guarded exterior. Whatever the reason, she knew her answer. All right, she said softly, a tentative smile playing on her lips. I accept your offer. A flicker of relief and satisfaction crossed Lorenzo's face. He stood, and Arya did too. To her surprise, he extended his hand to seal the agreement. She clasped it, and they shook. It felt more significant than just a professional handshake, as if they were forging a deeper pact. Ben, he said, a rare warmth in his voice. Welcome to the team, Arya. As they withdrew their hands, Lorenzo acted on impulse. He gently placed his hands on her upper arms and leaned in to brush a light kiss on her cheek. The gesture, European in custom, was accompanied by the subtle inhale of her scent. Arya's eyes fluttered, heart skipping. It was over in an instant, the heat of his breath and the soft pressure of his lips a mere graze. But it left her tingling. I'm genuinely pleased, he murmured near her ear, before stepping back to a respectable distance. We'll accomplish great things together. Arya managed to find her voice, ignoring the delightful shiver that had coursed through her. Thank you, Lorenzo. I'll do my best. They sat back down to finish the meal, discussing some details of her new role. She would start the next Monday, working primarily out of La Rosa Nera's administrative office upstairs from the restaurant. Her duties would involve handling press releases, managing social media and public image, and occasionally accompanying him to events as his communications advisor. It was all straightforward enough, on the surface. When lunch concluded, Lorenzo once again sent her home with his driver, insisting as part of getting used to how we do things. As the car rolled away, Arya pressed a hand to her cheek where he'd kissed it, her mind racing with what lay ahead. She had just made a pact with a Mafia boss. Whatever came next, her life was never going to be ordinary again. Over the next several weeks, Arya settled into her new job working for Lorenzo Vitale. True to his word, most of her tasks were legitimate PR work. Her days were filled with drafting glowing press releases, coordinating events at La Rosa Nera, and managing the public image of Lorenzo's businesses. Outwardly, Lorenzo was known as a successful, if mysterious, businessman and patron of the arts. Behind the scenes, Arya quickly learned to navigate the complex world that swirled around Lorenzo. Security was tight. Every morning when she arrived at the restaurant's upstairs offices, she passed by stoic men in suits who eyed everyone with suspicion. She had her own small office adjoining Lorenzo's. From there, she occasionally overheard snippets of his phone conversations through the wall, low, tense exchanges in Italian or sometimes Russian. She pretended not to notice the times he left abruptly with his bodyguards, returning hours later with a grim expression and smelling faintly of gunpowder and smoke. Despite the undercurrents of danger, Arya found herself thriving in the role. She was good at it, and Lorenzo proved a fair albeit demanding boss. He valued her opinion. A few times, when drafting a statement, he would call her into his office and ask, "What do you think of this wording?" If she had reservations, she voiced them, and he actually listened. It was heady, being treated as an equal by a man who commanded so much fear and respect from others. And then there was the pull between them. An undeniable tension underlay even mundane interactions. It started with the stolen glances. She'd catch him watching her across a conference table, his gaze sliding away when she looked back. Or he'd come up behind her at her desk as she typed, ostensibly to see a document, and linger a fraction closer than necessary. The warmth of his body radiating near her back. His cologne fogging her thoughts for a tantalizing moment. They kept things professional during work hours. But often, as the staff departed in the evenings, Lorenzo would invite her to stay for a late dinner in the restaurant's VIP lounge or a glass of wine in his office. Those were the times Arya cherished most, when the barriers lowered just enough for them to talk as friends, not merely employer and employee. One evening, about a month into her tenure, Arya found herself seated on the leather couch in Lorenzo's office after hours. A half-finished plate of pasta carbonara lay on the coffee table, alongside 2 glasses of red wine, breathing their rich aroma into the air. Outside, the city lights of Milan twinkled against the night sky visible through the large window. Lorenzo sat in an armchair across from her, having abandoned his suit jacket and tie. His top shirt button was undone, a rare casualness. He was recounting a light-hearted story from his youth, a humorous anecdote about how he once tried to impress a girl by attempting to cook and nearly set his kitchen on fire. Arya laughed, imagining a teenage Lorenzo more vulnerable and awkward. So I ended up covered in flour, the pan was in flames, and the poor girl actually grabbed the extinguisher and put it out herself. Lorenzo chuckled, shaking his head. Safe to say I did not win her heart that night. Arya giggled, swirling the wine in her glass. I can't picture you fumbling like that. You always seem so in control of everything. He gave a half smile. Not always, but I learned early how to present an image of control. In my family, weakness wasn't encouraged. Her smile faded slightly at the mention of family. In all their talks, he'd said little about his own. You haven't told me much about your family, she ventured gently. If you don't mind. Lorenzo's gaze grew distant. He took a slow sip of wine, collecting his thoughts. My father, Alessandro Vitale, was a man of considerable influence. He ran things before me. A hard man. He taught me everything he knew. But love was something he seldom showed. He paused, voice turning quieter. He died when I was 25, and I inherited his position in the organization. Arya watched him carefully. Lorenzo rarely referred openly to the Mafia, but this was the clearest admission yet that he was indeed Il Capo now. I'm sorry, she said softly. That must have been a lot of responsibility suddenly on your shoulders. It was, Lorenzo nodded. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I had no choice. In our world, power vacuums are dangerous. I had to grow up fast, make some very difficult decisions to secure my position and protect those under our umbrella. Some of those decisions still weigh on me. His voice grew almost hoarse at the admission. Arya set her glass down, sensing the depth of his mood. Lorenzo, he waved a hand as if to ward off her concern, offering a faint smile. My apologies. I didn't mean to darken the conversation. It's just talking with you. It's easy to forget that I have to maintain that constant front. You make me feel like I can be just a man, not a boss. He looked at her sincerely, something unguarded shining through. It's dangerous how comfortable I feel with you. Arya's heart skipped. She leaned forward slightly. I'm glad you feel that way. Because if I may say, I see both, the man and the boss. And I like the man I'm getting to know. Lorenzo's breath seemed to catch. In the warm lamplight, his gray eyes softened. He reached out and gently took her hand, which had been resting on her knee. You have no idea how much it means to hear that from you. Arya felt heat flutter in her chest at his touch. His thumb unconsciously caressed the back of her hand. They were crossing into unambiguously personal territory, but she didn't care. It felt right. Before either could speak again, a sharp knock at the door jolted them apart. Lorenzo's demeanor snapped back to alertness. He squeezed her hand once in apology, then released it and stood. Yes? The door cracked open, and one of his senior bodyguards, Marco, stuck his head in, looking apologetic. Boss, we have a situation. Carlo just called. There's been an incident at the docks. Arya watched as Lorenzo's entire posture changed, the warmth in his face draining to a hard intensity. "What kind of incident?" he demanded. Marco glanced briefly at Arya, unsure how frank to be in front of her. Lorenzo didn't miss it. "Speak freely. She's one of us," he said firmly, surprising Arya with both the trust implied and the fierceness in his tone. Marco nodded and continued. "There was an attack. One of our warehouse sites was set on fire. No casualties, but it's definitely a message from the Greco family. Carlos says it's escalating." Lorenzo's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "I see. Tell him I'll be there shortly. Have the car brought around." Marco ducked back out to relay the orders. Lorenzo turned to Arya, regret plain in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I have to deal with this." She stood as well, concern flooding her. She knew enough by now to be worried. The Greco family was a rival syndicate, and things had been tense in their territory negotiations. She only knew snippets, but enough to piece that together. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Be careful." He stepped closer, lifting a hand as if he wanted to touch her cheek, but then stopping himself. Instead, he offered a grim half-smile. "Don't worry about me. I'll see you tomorrow, all right?" Arya wanted to say more, to tell him she did worry, that she hated the thought of him walking into danger. But she nodded. "All right." With a reluctant sigh, Lorenzo escorted her out of his office. In the hallway, 2 more of his men fell in behind him, clearly ready for battle. Before he parted, Lorenzo met Arya's eyes and said in a low voice, "Go straight home. Lock your doors. I'll have someone keep an eye on your building tonight, just in case." A chill went through her at his implication. Just in case. They retaliate further? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Instead, Lorenzo gently pressed her hand. "Until tomorrow, Arya." And then he was off, striding down the corridor with lethal purpose, his men in tow. Arya left the restaurant and hurried home as instructed. That night she barely slept, her mind churning with worry. She realized with dismay how emotionally entangled she had become. She feared for Lorenzo's safety, as if he were already more than just her boss or friend. She cared for him deeply. As dawn approached, Arya finally dozed off on her couch, phone clutched in her hand. She had tried messaging him once to ask if he was all right, but no response came. It was only around 4 a.m. that a single reply arrived. "I'm safe. Don't worry." She exhaled in relief at those words, wishing he were there so she could see for herself. Little did she know, the events set in motion that night would soon put both of them in even greater peril, testing the bonds of trust and affection that had grown between them. In the weeks that followed, tension in the city's underworld hung thick as humidity in the summer air. The conflict between Lorenzo's Vitale family and the rival Greco clan escalated in a series of tit-for-tat strikes. Through hushed conversations and Lorenzo's guarded updates, Arya learned that the fire at the docks was answered by a counter-move. A secret Greco gambling den was suddenly raided and shut down, ostensibly by police tip-off but likely orchestrated by Lorenzo's influence. The adversaries were circling each other, and Arya could sense the strain it put on Lorenzo. He tried to keep her shielded from the ugliness of it. To an extent, he succeeded. Life at the restaurant continued normally, and her PR projects even thrived with several successful campaigns. Outwardly, everything appeared under control. But privately, Lorenzo grew more distant whenever trouble brewed. There were evenings he canceled their usual dinners, sending her home early for her safety. On those nights, she imagined him out in the streets, trading threats or worse with Greco's men. The thought of him in danger made her chest ache. One Friday night, after a particularly uneasy week, Arya was finishing up some work at her desk. Nearly everyone had left the office except a couple of security guys in the hallway, and Lorenzo himself, who was in a late meeting in his office with one of his capos. It was close to 9 p.m. Arya gathered her things, preparing to head home, when suddenly the sound of urgent shouting echoed from downstairs in the restaurant. She froze, heart jolting. A second later, the radio on a guard's belt crackled to life with frantic Italian. Arya caught bits. Intruso armato. Ingresso principale. Armed intruder, main entrance. The guards sprang into action, one rushing toward the stairs, the other moving to position himself at the end of the corridor outside Lorenzo's door. Before Arya could fully process what was happening, the door to the office suite burst open. A wild-eyed man with a pistol stormed in. He was bleeding from a cut on his temple. and his shirt bore the emblem of a delivery service, likely a disguise. Arya's blood ran cold as his gaze landed on her. "There you are. Vitaly's little pet journalist," the intruder spat, raising the gun toward her. He had a thick Neapolitan accent, a Greco henchman, Arya realized in terror. Time seemed to slow. Arya's mind went blank with fear as she stared down the barrel of the gun. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. The man sneered, taking a step closer. "Didn't think we'd find out about you? Thought we wouldn't know he has a weakness now?" His words dripped venom. "Where is Vitaly?" I don't know," Arya stammered truthfully, backing up until she hit the wall. Her eyes darted toward Lorenzo's office door at the far end of the hall, which was ajar. Had he heard? Was he still inside? The intruder misinterpreted her glance. He let out a bark of triumph and started moving toward that door, gun still aimed loosely in Arya's direction. "Boss, it's a trap!" Arya suddenly found her voice, screaming the warning with every ounce of strength. In the blink of an eye, two things happened at once. Lorenzo's office door swung fully open, and Lorenzo himself appeared, fury etched on his face, a gun already in his hand, and the intruder, realizing he'd been lured into revealing his position, spun back toward Arya in panic, finger tightening on the trigger to take her with him. A deafening gunshot exploded in the corridor. Arya flinched, expecting pain, but none came. The armed man stumbled, his shot going wide and shattering a light fixture above as he collapsed to the floor, a crimson stain spreading on his shoulder. Lorenzo was at Arya's side in an instant, shielding her with his body as he trained his smoking pistol on the downed attacker. The man groaned, clutching his wounded shoulder. Within seconds, Lorenzo's guards swarmed in, disarming the intruder and dragging him out, presumably to deal with him elsewhere. Arya stood trembling, pressed between the wall and Lorenzo's solid form. He kept an arm in front of her protectively until the scene was clear. Then slowly, he lowered his weapon and turned to her. "Dios mío, Arya," he breathed, voice rough with concern. "Are you hurt?" She was shaking so badly she could barely speak. I'm okay," she managed, though tears were welling in her eyes from the shock. You saved me." Lorenzo's eyes blazed as he gently grasped her shoulders, looking her up and down to be sure she was truly unharmed. Satisfied, he pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair, one hand cradling the back of her head. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you in danger." Arya clung to him, finally letting out a sob against his chest as the adrenaline crash hit. Her knees felt weak. Lorenzo supported her, his embrace the only thing keeping her upright. After a moment, he guided her carefully into his office and shut the door. The muffled sounds of his men barking orders could be heard in the hall, but inside, here it was quiet. He led her to the couch and sat her down, kneeling in front of her. His hands cupped her face, thumbs gently wiping away the tears that escaped her eyes. "It's all right now. You're safe," he whispered, though his own voice trembled with residual fear and rage. Arya realized he was as shaken as she. She tried to steady her breathing. He said they knew about me, that I'm your weakness," her voice quavered. "They targeted me to get to you, didn't they?" Lorenzo closed his eyes briefly, anguish etched on his face. "Yes, and it was my mistake. I let it be known that you were under my protection. I thought it would keep you safe, make others think twice before harming you. But I underestimated Salvatore Greco's desperation and cruelty." His jaw tightened. "I never should have allowed you to be here this late without more security. I put you at risk." Arya covered one of his hands on her cheek with her own. "Please don't blame yourself. I chose to be here. I chose this job knowing it came with dangers." His eyes bore into hers, stormy with guilt. "You shouldn't have had to face a gun because of me, Kara." She swallowed, feeling the intensity of his protectiveness as a heavy weight. And something else. He had called her his weakness. Did he feel it too, this connection that made them vulnerable? Tentatively, Arya reached up and laid her palm against Lorenzo's cheek. He leaned into her touch as though starved for its comfort. "I'm all right," she assured softly. "Thanks to you. You saved my life, Lorenzo. You could have been shot too." Her voice hitched at the thought. He covered her hand with his, turning his face to press a kiss into her palm. The gesture was intimate and full of unspoken emotion. "I would take a bullet for you without a second thought," he said quietly, his admission hanging in the charged air between them. Time seemed to slow again, but in a very different way. Arya's heart pounded not from terror now, but from the intensity of the moment. She realized how close they were, their faces inches apart, their breaths mingling. The danger had stripped away any pretense between them. "Lorenzo," she whispered, emotion clogging her throat. His name was a plea and a promise all at once. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, silently asking a question. Arya answered by rising up on her knees and closing the scant distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a gentle, tremulous kiss. For a heartbeat, Lorenzo seemed shocked, frozen. Then, with a low groan from deep in his chest, he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back fervently. Months of restrained longing poured into that moment. His mouth was warm and urgent, moving against hers with both tenderness and pent-up passion. Arya melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair as she returned the kiss wholeheartedly. The taste of him, wine and adrenaline and something uniquely Lorenzo, ignited a fire in her veins. He held her as if afraid she would vanish, one arm banded around her waist, the other hand cradling the back of her head. They finally broke apart only when air became an issue. Lorenzo's forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. He looked at her with a mixture of wonder and fear. "Arya, I shouldn't pull you any deeper into this," he murmured, even as he brushed his lips across hers again in a feather-light caress, clearly unwilling to let go. "I don't care about the danger," Arya replied, tears of earnestness brimming in her eyes. "I care about you. Don't push me away, please." A shudder ran through him, as if her words broke some final resolve inside. He drew her into another embrace, burying his face against her shoulder. "I tried so hard to keep my distance. To keep you safe," he confessed hoarsely. "But Dio, Arya, I can't anymore. He stopped himself, but she knew what he meant to say. Her heart soared. "I know," she whispered, threading her fingers soothingly through his hair. "I feel the same." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the hush of the office. The crisis outside had been handled. A hush fell in the hallway as Lorenzo's men secured the area. For now, it was just them. Eventually, Lorenzo pulled back slightly to look at her, brushing a strand of hair tenderly from her face. "Tonight, I'm taking you to my home," he said with quiet determination. "It will be easier to ensure you're protected there, and I don't want to be apart from you right now." Arya nodded. After what had happened, she didn't want to be alone either, and a part of her longed to see his private sanctuary, the home of the man she had given her heart to. Within the hour, Lorenzo had arranged everything. He personally escorted Arya to a discreet car in the back alley, manned by 2 of his most trusted guards. The drive to his estate on the outskirts of the city was a blur for Arya. She was exhausted and emotionally drained, but also filled with solace simply being by Lorenzo's side. His home was a sprawling villa on a hill, surrounded by high walls and gated security. Normally, Arya would have been awed by the luxurious halls and ornate furnishings, but in that moment all she cared about was that it was safe and quiet. Lorenzo led her to a guest bedroom himself. It was a beautiful room, but as he turned to leave her to rest, she caught his hand. The adrenaline of earlier had worn off, leaving raw vulnerability. "Stay," she whispered. He hesitated only a moment before nodding. He didn't misinterpret her plea. Both of them simply didn't want to be alone. That night, Lorenzo held Arya in his arms in the darkness of his villa, murmuring Italian words of comfort until she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, safe at last together. The following morning dawned soft and golden over Lorenzo's villa. Arya awoke in unfamiliar silken sheets, momentarily disoriented, until the memories of the previous day came rushing back. The attack, the kiss, and Lorenzo holding her through the night. She sat up to find the other side of the bed empty, but the imprint of him remained in the covers, and a faint trace of his cologne lingered on the pillows. She freshened up quickly, finding that a small overnight bag, apparently delivered from her apartment by one of his staff, had been neatly placed on a chair. After dressing in a simple cotton sundress, Arya ventured out into the hall. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. Eventually, she followed distant voices and found Lorenzo in a bright sunroom overlooking a manicured garden. He stood with his back to her, phone to his ear, speaking in low, authoritative tones. Yes, like keep him alive for now. I want to send a message, but not yet. We'll handle it discreetly. He noticed Arya then, and his tone softened slightly. I have to go. Handle it. He hung up and managed a small, relieved smile in her direction. Good morning. Good morning, she replied, stepping into the room. A breakfast spread was laid on a table. Coffee, fresh pastries, fruit. But her appetite was thin. She was focused only on him. Is everything all right? Lorenzo gestured for her to sit with him at the table. As she did, he poured her a cup of coffee. The man from last night is being questioned, he said carefully. My men will extract whatever information they can about the Greco's plans. Arya's heart heavy, she looked down. She didn't like to imagine what that questioning entailed. And yet, after nearly being killed, some hardened part of her was glad the man wouldn't get off lightly. Did that make her complicit? She wasn't sure how to feel. I'm sorry you've been dragged so deeply into this, Lorenzo said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. I wish I could shield you from it all. Arya met his gaze. I knew there were risks when I got involved with you, with your world. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I don't regret it, Lorenzo. His fingers turned to intertwine with hers. Even after last night? She nodded resolutely. Fear still coiled in her belly at the memory of the gunman, but stronger was the feeling blooming in her heart. There. She'd admitted it fully to herself now. She loved him. Perhaps it was too soon. Perhaps it was folly, but it was true. Lorenzo looked at her with such tenderness then that she felt bare. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but before he could, he simply sighed and squeezed her hand. I never wanted to put you in harm's way. I know, she said softly. But it wasn't your fault. It's Greco's. Lorenzo's expression turned thoughtful, troubled. Either way, I need to resolve this conflict quickly. I won't have my family or you living under threat. You think Greco will retaliate again? Arya asked quietly. A shadow passed over Lorenzo's face. He might, but I plan to end it before he gets another chance. There was a cold finality in his tone that made Arya shiver slightly. Lorenzo noticed and squeezed her hand. I won't involve you in that side of things, Arya. Not any more than you already have been. In fact, he hesitated. It's best if you stay here at the villa for a while, at least until this is settled. It's secure. You can work remotely, and I'll ensure you're protected. Arya felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief at being safer in his home, frustration at being sidelined from her own life. But she knew he was right. What about my apartment? My things? I'll send someone to collect whatever you need. And your place will be watched in case anyone comes sniffing around, Lorenzo said readily. He looked at her with concern. I know it's inconvenient, but per favor, do this for me. Just until it's safe. It was hard to argue when he looked at her like that. She nodded slowly. All right, I'll stay. He visibly relaxed, bringing her hand to his lips and placing a grateful kiss there. Thank you. Over the next few days, Arya stayed at the Vitale Villa as requested. She spent mornings handling work emails and press drafts from her laptop, but her concentration was poor. Her thoughts were consumed by worry for Lorenzo, who was often away, handling business. On the nights he came home late, he would always come find her, even if she was already in bed, just to hold her for a while or talk softly about lighter things, as if lulling them both into a sense of normalcy. Their relationship blossomed in those stolen moments. Gentle kisses in the hallway, fingers entwined while sitting together reading news on the couch, even domestic chats over the dinner table about favorite childhood books or where they'd like to travel someday. It was startling how easily they fell into being a couple when the rest of the world was kept at bay. Yet one thing loomed unspoken between them. Neither had explicitly said I love you, though both felt it growing stronger by the day. Perhaps it was fear that once said aloud, fate might test them even more. On the 5th day of Arya's stay, she was in the library reading when she heard raised voices from Lorenzo's office down the hall. Lorenzo was clearly planning something dangerous, a direct confrontation with Salvatore Greco, and he hadn't told her. She wandered back into the library and sank into a chair, mind racing. Lorenzo was trying to protect her from further fear, but keeping her in the dark made her feel helpless. A few minutes later, Lorenzo himself approached the library. He had finished whatever heated discussion was happening, and now stood at the door, his face composed. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Arya mustered a smile, closing the book she hadn't actually been reading. "Yes, just keeping busy." Inside, her stomach flipped with anxiety. She considered confronting him about what she suspected, what she'd overheard. After a moment, she decided honesty was best. "Lorenzo, is there something you want to tell me?" He tilted his head, feigning ignorance. "What do you mean?" Arya rose, unable to sit still. "I overheard a little just now. You're planning to confront Greco directly, aren't you? To draw him out." A flash of surprise, then concern crossed his features. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he began, but she cut him off, stepping closer. "How can I not worry?" she said, voice trembling. "You're talking about luring a dangerous man to meet you one-on-one. That's reckless, Lorenzo." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's the surest way to end this quickly. I won't give him time to hurt anyone else, and I won't live in fear, or have you live in fear either. This has to end. At what cost? Your life?" Arya's eyes stung. "What if something happens to you? Have you thought of that?" "I have backup," he replied evenly. "And surprise on my side. I'm not walking in to die, Arya." "But you could," she burst out, voice cracking. "And I can't just sit here in your house and wait, not knowing if—" She trailed off, unable to speak the terrible possibility. Lorenzo stepped forward and gently took her arms. "Arya, look at me." She did, blinking back tears. His gaze was fierce. "I will come back to you. I swear it. I know it's hard to wait, but I need you safe. If I let you any nearer to this and something happened to you, I could never forgive myself." A tear escaped down her cheek. "And if I lose you, how could I forgive myself if I never got to—" She caught herself, realizing she'd almost confessed her love in anger and fear. But Lorenzo heard it loud and clear. His face softened. "Arya, amore mio," he whispered, and she drew in a breath at the term. "My love, you won't lose me. You have my heart, you know that? I never intended to give it. But somehow you stole it piece by piece." A quiet sob of relief and joy escaped her lips. "You have mine too," she managed to say. He cupped her face and kissed her deeply. An urgent, soulful kiss that tasted of salt from her tears and sweetness from all the words left unspoken. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead to hers. "Ti amo," he finally breathed, voice hoarse but firm. "I love you, Arya." A radiant, tearful smile broke over her face. "I love you too, Lorenzo. So much." They stood wrapped in each other, the confession settling like a warmth around them. In the end, Arya acquiesced to staying behind when Lorenzo set his plan in motion the next night. He wouldn't tell her the details, only that he was meeting Salvatore Greco at an abandoned factory under the guise of negotiating a truce, while a contingent of his loyal men lay in wait nearby to spring a trap and capture Greco once incriminating evidence was recorded. It sounded dangerously optimistic to Arya, but Lorenzo's resolve was unbreakable. Before he left at dusk, he pulled Arya aside in the foyer of the villa. Dressed in dark tactical clothes, a bulletproof vest visible under his jacket, he looked every bit the Mafia king going to war. He kissed her one last time, slow and deep, as if committing every detail to memory, or giving himself a reason to come back alive. "Aspettami, cara," he whispered against her lips. "Wait for me." "Always," she whispered back, swallowing her fear. Then he was gone into the night. Arya paced the halls for hours, anxiety gnawing at her. The remaining staff gave her a wide berth, sensing her tension. No call, no message. Finally, close to midnight, Arya's phone buzzed. She snatched it up from the table where she'd left it. It was a message from one of Lorenzo's men. "It's done. He's safe. We're coming home." Arya slumped against the wall, knees weak with relief as she clutched the phone to her chest. He was safe. They had done it. Tears of gratitude spilled down her cheeks as she silently thanked every star in the sky. Now she just needed to see him with her own eyes. Not 20 minutes later, the front doors opened. Arya flew to the foyer to find Lorenzo striding in, flanked by a few of his guards. He looked exhausted, a bruise darkening one cheek and a dried cut on his temple, his jacket smeared with dust. But to Arya, he never looked so wonderful. "Lorenzo!" she cried, rushing to him. He caught her in his arms immediately, lifting her feet off the ground slightly in his embrace. "I'm here. I'm all right," he murmured into her hair as she peppered his face with tearful kisses, not caring that his men were watching. He laughed softly, squeezing her. "Stai attenta. I'm a little banged up." Arya pulled back enough to inspect him, gingerly touching the bruise on his cheek. "You're hurt." He shook his head, smiling tiredly. "Just a scratch or two. Greco's finished. I gave him an ultimatum he couldn't refuse. He'll be turning himself and evidence over to the authorities by sunrise, claiming he wants leniency. In truth, his power is broken." A rare twinkle of triumph lit Lorenzo's eyes. "It's over, Amore. The danger is over." A sob of relief escaped Arya as she hugged him tightly again. Weeks of tension released from her body at those words. Lorenzo stroked her hair, his voice tender and light for the first time in ages. "And I came back to you as I promised." She laughed through her tears, looking up at him with absolute adoration. "And now I get to hold you to all your other promises. No more excuses," he chuckled, the sound like music to her ears. "I'm a man of my word. We have a flight to Lake Como to plan, do we not?" Arya's heart swelled. This was real, a chance at a future together, free from constant fear. "That we do," she said softly. She reached up and kissed him, a kiss full of love and the taste of a tomorrow they would share. Outside, the first hint of dawn was breaking, casting a gentle light on a world that, for them, had been so dark for so long. In each other's arms, Arya and Lorenzo knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. A warm breeze rustled through the olive trees as the Tuscan sun dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and gold. On the terrace of a countryside villa, Arya Vitale set a pitcher of lemonade on a rustic wooden table and called out, "Lorenzo, the lemonade is ready." Moments later, Lorenzo emerged from the garden carrying their squealing 3-year-old son, Alessandro, on his shoulders. The boy had a mop of dark curls and gray eyes just like his father. We're coming," Lorenzo laughed, lifting little Alessandro off his shoulders and into his arms as he joined Arya on the terrace. Arya's heart fluttered at the sight of them, father and son, the two loves of her life. She playfully poured a tiny cup of lemonade for Alessandro, who clapped his hands and reached for it. "Careful, it's a bit cold," she warned gently as the toddler took an eager sip and then giggled from the tart sweetness. Lorenzo wrapped an arm around Arya's waist as they sat together, enjoying the tranquil evening. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at La Rosanera. So much had changed, and all for the better. After Salvatore Greco's arrest and the collapse of his criminal empire, Lorenzo had made good on his word to transform his life. With the worst of the turf wars over, he gradually divested from the more violent parts of his business, focusing his wealth on legitimate enterprises, hotels, restaurants, and a burgeoning winery project here in Tuscany. He still held influence in many circles, but he had become a new kind of boss, one who built things up instead of tearing them down. True to her principles, Arya had helped guide him toward philanthropic efforts. Together, they founded a charitable foundation that funded education and community programs in underprivileged Italian neighborhoods. Arya took great pride in this work, and Lorenzo often said she was the soul of the operation, guiding him to use his power for good. They had married in a small private ceremony on the shores of Lake Como, just as they once daydreamed. Lorenzo even wept openly when he saw her walking down the aisle, and there wasn't a dry eye among the handful of loved ones present. Even some of his toughest men discreetly wiped away tears. That day had been the most beautiful of Arya's life, until it was eclipsed by the birth of their son 3 years later. Arya leaned her head against Lorenzo's shoulder now, watching Alessandro toddle off to chase a bright butterfly fluttering over the lawn. A couple of security personnel, discreet but ever-present, kept a distant watch to ensure the child didn't wander too far. "Can you believe it's been 5 years?" Arya murmured, leaning into Lorenzo as they looked out over rows of olive trees and grapevines basking in the late sunlight. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes a lifetime ago." Lorenzo kissed the top of her head. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank fate for that night," he said softly. "Meeting you changed everything. You brought light into my life when I was lost in darkness." Arya smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "And you showed me a love I never knew was possible. We saved each other, didn't we?" He nodded, gently tipping her chin up and pressing a tender kiss to her lips. When they parted, his gray eyes were warm and at peace. Ti amo, Arya, he whispered. I love you too, Lorenzo, she replied, heartful, as they stood there under the violet Tuscan twilight, wrapped in each other's arms. Arya thought back to that fateful evening when a powerful, guarded man had seen her sitting alone and simply said, "Come with me." She had taken his hand, and it led them here to a life of shared joy, hard-won peace, and a love that would forever light their way.